Okay, so you've got it from a little bit of a vendor perspective. Now what we want to do is bring up a few consultants to give you how they look at what's going on in blockchain. And the person leading this, our moderator, is Melvin Pettis. Melvin, where are you? There he is. Come on up, Melvin. This guy, if you haven't met Melvin, you got to spend a little bit of time talking. We talk about energy and passion behind something that he does. Melvin's the man that has it happen. Melvin, come on up, bring up the consultants that are working with you, and let's make it happen.
All right, thanks everybody. I can't believe what an awesome crowd we have here today. Believe it or not, almost 5 months ago, it was hard to find a room of 20 or 30 people in Chicago who wanted to talk blockchain. And so here we are, some 300 people later, almost 350, we had to turn away 60 of them because the message got out. And so in looking at, our history, I just wanted to take us all the way back to the beginning. And so to start this conversation off, I'd like to start with some really practical thinking about how we think about trust and how we think about value and scarcity, right? So it'll be an interactive session. You get a chance to interact with our panelists. We're going to throw some questions at you or some statements, and we want to pick your brains as far as how you think the market really is positioned right now for blockchain technology. So first question of the day, what's the first precious currency that we all are born with and we first start transacting with, or one of the first? Time. Awesome. All right, that's the one I had in mind. Identity is definitely one, but the one I had in mind is time, right? And so no matter who you talk to, there's a certain philosophy that each person lives by, right? We have, you only live once, right? You've heard that. You always live again, right? And so both of them are dichotomies of the same principle, essentially, is keep track, right, of how I'm doing and how I will do in the future. And so the impetus is the same, no matter how you think about that, right? We're paying attention, right? And so today we're paying attention, we're investing in ourselves, we're investing in the community around blockchain. And so today we're going to start off with John Callahan, who is from Viridium. Really interesting startup. We hit the other topic, identity, right? Something that we're born with, but we don't have great management over. And so John's going to take us through his concept for how he engages business. John has a PhD from University of Maryland, one of my old haunts, as a matter of fact, a bubble tea shop over there, raised me for the first 5 years of my adult life, so awesome connection there. John is also the CTO of Viridium, and he has also held leadership positions at Johns Hopkins and the Office of Naval Research, as a matter of fact. Next, we'll have Joe Tino, who's also on our panel. Joe is interested in helping companies with partnerships, blockchain partnerships, obviously, right? Capital markets, and different means of adoption. He manages out of Accenture's Chicago-based wealth management practice, and he also has played key roles in all aspects of project management, everything from the due diligence to actual delivery. And so we're excited to see what perspectives Joe will be able to provide to our panel today. And then finally, but not least, definitely not least, we have Obriani O'Brien. And a really interesting fact about Obriani is that her last name is one of my middle names, and so I guess that makes us cousins somehow. She actually just flew in from New York, and she was smart enough to take the early flight because we know what those delays can be like. And so she's a lead solutions architect for blockchain and distributed infrastructure solutions at Ernst & Young. And she also has an incredible story, one that I'm sure a lot of us will be sharing in a few years. And that is that she has led an actual blockchain or Bitcoin-based company called Early Temple. Hopefully she'll get a chance to talk about those. But without further ado, I'd like for John to come up and take us through Viridium and some of the amazing concepts behind sovereignty and identity management that you all have been working on.
Can I do it from here?
Yeah, you can do it from there. That's fine.
Can we go back one slide? No, not back, please. 2 slides. No, keep.
One more?
First slide. Go back to one more. There we go. So thank you, Melvin.
Very welcome.
It's great to be on the panel here. Great to be here in Chicago. So I've heard a lot of terms today. I'm very happy that I didn't expect to hear early on, but I've heard them, and one of them is self-sovereign identity. So we're here because blockchain is disruptive. We believe this is happening, and identity is one of the most disruptive spaces, and self-sovereign identity is one of the centerpieces of many of the projects, actually, that are going on. So why is self-sovereign identity important? I want to say a few things about that. So first, it puts your identity data in your control, okay, which moves real-time authentication, okay, when you need to authenticate using some credentials in your hands, and brings it from 3 parties down to 2. Okay, that's disruptive. So currently when you do like log in with Google or log in with Facebook and stuff like that, but more importantly, that's going to allow us to do much more commerce with you know, this new digital trusted identity, right? Like buy a house online or register your kid for birth, right, with birth certificate. I mean, these are things that normally we'd have to present ourselves in person, right? So a lot of things we can't do online because of, you know, the 2 parties just not trusted. So self-sovereign identity is really going toward this. And blockchain technologies serve as that trusted repository to allow that 2-party, right? So I don't rely on some vendor-locked third party. So, but how do we store and maintain and exchange and so forth? How are they issued, right? What's the formats and so forth? So next slide, please. So probably about what was it going on 30 years now? An organization called the W3C faced this problem before. I unfortunately was alive at the time when we had lots of different networks and internetworking, right? I worked for Xerox, and we had Xerox network systems, which is all the way down to the IP level, was different. And anyway, long story. But the W3C, again, is at an effort to try to identify cross-chain resources, right? Encode them, format them, and here displayed is one of the efforts. And we're involved in that. We're not an identity company, Veridium. We're a biometric authentication company, and you know, we want to work with lots of identity standards. And this is one I think is really coming up very fast. A lot of efforts going on related to this. So here you see what a DID is. It's really just like a URL, right? So the URLs of old starts out with DID, colon, and then the method, and that's like a chain, right? And then the method-specific identifier is basically a hash of whatever document. And that document can be stored on-chain, off-chain, in cloud storage, right, on the web. It can be stored in lots of places, right? But it's under your control, and you can present these credentials starting with like a DID. Next slide, because that shows some. So the first one is the Bitcoin, you know, chain, right? So BTCR is a method. Sovereign, right? We've heard Sovereign mentioned before. Hyperledger and IBM supporting Sovereign, right, with Fabric. This is what Sovereign currently is running on. IPID runs on the Interplanetary File System. If anybody doesn't know about that, it's called IPFS. And then Versus One is by a company called Digital Bazaar. They're working with the Department of Homeland Security on work funded for DIDs through the W3C. So it's very exciting work. And this lastly I want to mention, so last slide, please. Little plug of Veridium's work. So we are not an identification company, we're not an ID company, not an identity company. We want to work with these standards, but we walked the walk, work with the IEEE, and recently released the Biometric Open Protocol standard. It's called BOPS. Our server supports this, and it supports self-sovereign identity, supports these up-and-coming standards, extends biometric credentials, right? Probably some of the most private credentials, in addition to things like health records, to blockchain related, not storing on the blockchain, but off-chain, but using things like DIDs to point to those objects that you have the ability to control, lock, encrypt, and so forth. So anyway, that's all I want to say is that it's, you know, this disruptive world is going to get even more disruptive and decentralized, and I'm very happy that we're here discussing it today. Thanks, Mama.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joe. So we're going to open up the floor. Do we have any questions so far about what was just presented on identity?
So as far as identity, when you put a document in the system at the hash address, is the document encrypted at the hash address, or is it just in the hash address?
So now we're down in the weeds on DIDs and things. So yes and no. It actually depends on that method you saw. Okay, they can be completely open, right, for public claims. So there's a concept called verifiable claims, which the credentials community group of the W3C is working on. And there is something you want to share, right? Other things, yes, you can encrypt. Basically, you hold the keys for that.
Not even at the level of holding keys, but encrypting the document while it says it's hash address. So I would have to use some third-party encryptor in being say that it's hash address.
You may. So I'll point you, again, the answer is yes and no. It's method dependent. You can rely on authentication credentials, right, that are actually in the DID document that say, how do I open up this thing? How do I update this document, right? So that's W3C is working on those DID standards, right? How do you store them? How do you update them? How do you move them to a new, how do you revoke them? How do you recover them and so forth? It's really good work. Last week in Boston, there was the Rebooting Web of Trust workshop, okay, sponsored by the W3C and along other groups. Was anybody there? I don't recognize anybody. But, and then next week in Mountain View, California will be the Internet Identity Workshop. And that will carry on further work like this and the DIDs. And that's in Mountain View at the Computer History Museum. That's the 25th meeting of the Internet Identity Workshop, IIW. That's where OAuth was authored and worked on. So it's a very working session. So if any of you can attend, IIW next week.
Awesome. And John, I'm assuming that we can all connect with you to figure out if any of us are representing identity-based solutions within our organizations. We can reach out to you for those resources.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so sorry. So we only have about maybe 10 more minutes. And so if you have any more questions, please come and grab any one of us from the lobby here. And as an after perk, if you will, we'll be looking to connect over at the Metropolitan Club at the Sears Tower just down the street if you have some time after the event and you have some more questions. So for anyone who's interested in that, just contact me and I'll let you know the details. So one of the things that we really wanted to do was kind of provoke some more thought around this whole space of blockchain. And so we came up with what we thought were some provocative thoughts that folks might have about this space, just so that we could all challenge them as an audience and as a panel. One of the first questions that we wanted to entertain, or one of the thoughts that we wanted to entertain, is the following. The best strategy regarding this space right now is to just wait and see what mature products shake out before jumping in. Do we have any thoughts regarding that particular strategy? By a show of hands, how many people agree with that strategy and how many people disagree with that strategy as being a valid way to proceed? And it's not a trick question, so don't think that somebody's going to say, yeah, they're not ready for blockchain. No one's going to say that. All right,
Everyone
so we got to
wants to
show,
jump right in.
so the best strategy is to just wait and see what mature products shake out before we get involved. How many folks think that's a great strategy to have right now, or it's a valid strategy to have right now? Let's just say. Well, it depends, right? It depends on some spaces, right? If there's high levels of risk, right, that might actually be a valid strategy, because you might not have the technical capability to actually achieve the solution that you want.
Yeah,
So
and-
I was just wondering how many folks were actually kind of leaning that way.
I disagree. The reason for that is because that's what separates the leaders from the laggards. And if you don't jump in and you gotta understand your engineering prowess, you have a great opportunity to be a leader in this market. And what's happening right now is a very disruptive technology. If you get in on the ground floor, you're able to participate in standard setting. Because right now it's a little bit like the wild, wild west.
Indeed, yeah.
And we've got big players like China and other countries that are getting involved. This is writing on the wall right there that there's something there.
So it sounds like we have an opinion that seems to point towards getting involved in the standards. And it looks like, Joe, you have something to say towards that.
Yeah, so I was going to say, if we're talking about consulting experience, what we're seeing in the market, it's a different answer for everyone, obviously, where some firms have a big dedicated research and development group or an innovation group that is on hand, ready to take on the next challenge. Some don't. Yeah, it's great to be a participant in defining the standards, but if you don't have the time and resources and people to do it, why learn someone else's standard that they're really focused on? Like, IBM's devoting a bunch of code to something. Let them figure out the right standard with everyone they're already talking to, jump on once it's mature, and don't, essentially waste time learning something that's just going to change the next month anyway. So just
Yeah.
as a challenge.
I'll add to that. So what we're seeing is that when you're trying to get this past organizations, innovation labs, and into the business side of things, because, to be honest, while this is a technology, it's really a business-driven technology solution. What we're finding is that this is not a cost play, this technology. It does not reduce your costs in the short term. In fact, it probably increases your costs in the short term because of the changes in the underlying business processes that have to occur. So it's quite a difficult dialogue to have with a lot of enterprises because they can't approach this from your typical cost play. That is also kind of compounded by the fact that it requires a network effect to start really realizing the benefits of a lot of this technology. And what that means is that you need multiple participants outside of your organization participating in that network in order to start realizing that value, since you're not going to be able to make a cost play. So from a strategy perspective, where it starts becoming important for organizations is understanding what are these developing ecosystems and what roles can they play in these ecosystems. And we're already starting to see that ecosystem development through these crypto assets, whether it's Bitcoin or these other alternative coins that are popping up. And traditional clients of ours, whether they're banks or rating agencies, are trying to figure out how to respond to this and what their role is going to be. And so that's where we're finding a lot of our clients putting forth the effort, because the technology hasn't necessarily developed to a point yet where it can address a lot of the enterprise level considerations. But we're finding that our clients are trying to get ahead of the curve and also basically perform what we call these trigger tests, where they understand what are the triggers in the market that would provoke them to have to actually make a move. And so with that, they have their strategy in the background to be able to make that move when a trigger occurs.
Excellent response from our panel. Wow, I have two more questions. Unfortunately, we only have like 5 minutes left, but it's great to see the level of engagement here. So I got two more, and then I'd be happy to take your question as well outside. So 2 questions, we'll load you up with 2. One is, specialized talent is needed to, not questions, but statements. Specialized talent is needed to properly adopt blockchain, by a show of hands. Specialized talent is needed to adopt blockchain. How many folks agree with that? Okay, and we're talking about special technical talent, meaning you need to know something special about how to talk to a blockchain to make it happen. All right, so we've got about maybe a third of the audience. All right, so let's keep that one in mind, and I'll pass it on. And then the next one that I think is worth tackling is, and this is a hot button item, ICOs are the best way to raise money for your organization no matter what. Oh, okay, so by a show of hands. Okay, so let's go ahead and take the first one. Specialized talent is necessary for making blockchain technology work within your organization.
So I can take that. As kind of similar to the discussion we just had, there are existing blockchain solutions out there, like Ethereum is Solidity. So you kind of have to learn a new programming language. There are alternate currencies that are popping up that focus on having easy to talk to RESTful APIs, things like that, to create everything, run everything. So you could take your existing tech talent. Yeah, they have to learn maybe a new package or a bunch of new packages, but they can use that same code base that they already have experience developing and connect that to the apps that already exist at your firm, given the platform allows for that. Those players aren't, the main chains in the market right now, but maybe they will be in a month.
We have any other perspectives on that? Yes, sir.
I would say that not only do you need the technical people that are going to create the code, and you also need the salespeople that are going to sell it so you can actually monetize it. And then as you get into blockchain,
Absolutely. I think that was a great perspective.
Yeah, and our firm, like, we've adopted a suits plus genes approach because we realize that you need these hybrids basically in order to be able to communicate between the tech and the business folks, from both a practical matter of identifying how to leverage the attributes of this technology to actually provide value to your organization, and also to start, to sell it through the chain within an organization, which requires a complex sales process. So we call it our suits plus genes approach.
I want to add that, push back a little on the not participating on early standard stuff, but I think that you don't have to lead a standard or write a standard or something, but attending a meeting or two, right? You learn the questions that are being brought up as it's being formulated, right? And we had a lot of people in Boston last week, right? Local companies just attended. They lurked in the back of the room most of the meetings, but they ask use case questions, right? And it got some of the people that deal with the upper level standard stuff, have been there a while, it got them to question themselves. So it's a community process. You don't have to be the leader, but participate, listen, ask some questions. It helps.
Okay, did anybody want to tackle the ICO question, or do we want to go to blockchain applications are better suited for record keeping than front-end interactions or applications? Blockchain applications are better for back-end, too slow for front-end. Okay, awesome. All right, so we got about 10% of the crowd that agrees with that.
I was going to actually tackle the ICO question.
Oh, okay, go for it.
Some color on that. I think
Please, by all means, yeah.
Pretty sexy topic in the market. So what's interesting about ICOs, and for those who are not familiar, basically it's a mechanism that people started to employ in order to raise capital. And what they're doing is you have these companies that are issuing tokens. The rights associated with those tokens are largely TBD. And they're doing it as a way to circumvent, US securities regulations. And from the perspective of being able to use technology as a way to gain access to new sources of capital, and as a result of that, democratize the value creation process, I think that's really interesting and really cool. That being said, there's still mature ways to go about doing that. And so what we started to do is focus on helping companies, structure not only whether or not they fall outside of securities regulations based on the nature of the tokens and the rights associated with those tokens, but also with a focus on investor reporting. I think a lot of the companies who are issuing these ICOs, miss out on this notion of investor reporting, whereby if you're not relaying enough information or a good quality of information, you could still run afoul of securities regulations, because if your investors or the people holding these coins don't have the ability to make informed decisions with respect to your project because they're not informed, then they get kicked into being passive participants rather than active participants. So these are just considerations that, kind of nod back to traditional standards of reporting for IPOs that tech companies that are looking to issue ICOs can draw upon in order to just help them minimize their exposure to running afoul of prescribed regulations.
So, Obriani, it almost sounds like we have a model by where we can kind of gauge our interaction with the public through existing frameworks. Is that a good way of kind of?
Exactly, and that's what we're doing. Like, from just our own firm's approach in terms of taking a strategy is where we're looking to understand and identify these parallels, because there's basically a new market that's developing.
And
Excellent.
just to add on to all that, if you've been following kind of recent ICOs, it's gone from literally no background check at all, and no one cares who's donating, and I think that still exists, but there's things like the new, I think Overstock.com has a new platform that's going to have a lot of KYC involved to try to, tie that together with existing KYC processes so that the US, SEC actually knows who's investing in this. And you have to be an accredited investor. There's a real team backing this thing, or otherwise they wouldn't list it as an ICO. They're trying to bring it up to speed with something like an IPO, obviously not as intense yet.
And to bring it back to identity, but the KYC AML efforts, the idea is, where do you establish those in a digitally credentialed world, right? How do I know? So it gets back to some of the identity questions. Yeah. It's a lot of balls in the air here.
Yeah, and there's specific coins out there that focus on that, being your I don't know, a hash on a block somewhere, and all the other nodes have said that's true. So as those mature, it'll be interesting to see, which one wins out for verifying all that.
Excellent. Any thoughts on execution of blockchain applications in the back end versus front end? Where do they belong? Oh, one more question? Yep.
So, you mentioned something about know your customer. Has anybody actually practiced this with the know your customer verification?
Via blockchain identity? Not that I know of yet, right?
Yeah, I don't know all the details about it, but I know the Civic chain used their own identity chain to run their ICO. So that was one of the big recent ones that I think actually used identity based on their own chain to essentially credentialize all their investors.
But
You
not
have
for
block apps,
traditional.
Yeah, you have a
Right,
few.
right.
Yeah, you have a few options, right? And I think it goes back to the standards that are being developed, right? If you know you're going to be mostly on one platform, you can probably get away, with just one product. But if it really is like a universal, identity management solution, and I think we're still kind of seeing the
And there are
yeah,
vendors
development of
that
that.
are offering to do the KYC for your ICO. I can't think of any names right now, but I can get with you later and point you to them. But that is evolving and is starting to exist.
coin list, I think, is one, right?
Sounds right.
Yeah. Okay.
Fundamental blockchains in general, right, they're still pretty immature, and the ICOs aren't even built yet. But when you guys help define to blockchain applications, even Bitcoin is not really fully mature from a security perspective and some other issues. How are you able to bridge the gap? Your clients get the general processes over to blockchain technologies that are fundamentally still, I don't think they're ready to prime time yet, but they still be active for what they need to.
Right, and so that's where the focus on strategy has come in because, from a business perspective, we have a basic understanding of what the attributes of these technologies are that are associated with whether it's a public blockchain or these distributed ledger technologies. So we're helping our clients to align those attributes with markets that are developing and also, potential opportunities for them. From a technology perspective, I think that's why you'll see there hasn't actually been any real implementation of an enterprise-level blockchain solution. It's a lot of press releases around proofs of concept, but not yet an enterprise-level application.
Of public chains, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've almost never heard anything but Bitcoin and Ethereum from any client. So yes, there's 1,000 others out there, but nobody, as you said, nobody knows about them yet. That's probably for the best now because it's either a real company or someone working in their garage. So it's until those have better marketing around them, have more proofs of concepts, at least internally, no one's going to be talking at the enterprise level. No one's going to be talking about the other bottom 500 coins.
There's
Yeah,
actually a report out too on from IEEE that talks about decision matrix that you move through. Have you seen those,
Yeah,
like
I've seen it.
decision bubbles? And it helps you determine whether or not your company really should even be considering a blockchain over a traditional database versus a public blockchain over a private consortium chain that we've just seen examples from IBM and Microsoft. So. I'll get it for you. It's actually posted on my LinkedIn feed. If you get a chance to search me on LinkedIn, Melvin Pettis, and then you'll see the IEEE report on. It was actually, they did quite a few different reports. Like I think it was maybe 6 or 7 different reports that they did, and that was one. It was a decision strategy discussion on whether discussion on whether or not you even need to consider blockchain as a solution for whatever business problem you're solving.
Yeah,
And if you are, if it should be public or private.
Yeah, I'd recommend the IEEE matrix as well. And there's she's a purported legal expert on blockchain technology, Angela Walsh.
Okay.
And she actually advises people, don't use the word immutable, right? Because it's not proved. There's hard and soft forks on some of the chains, right?
Yeah.
Still to be done, maybe. So she likes the word tamper evident, right? That we use and factor that into your risk.
All right, well, everyone on the panel, I really do appreciate your awesome contributions. Those of you in the audience, same. We look forward, for those of you who are in Chicago and get a chance to come out to Fintank, please come out. Our discussions usually gauge around these same types of topics, same interaction, and everyone's welcome. If you're a developer, a business developer, come on down. Thanks.